We've got a ton of damage reduction, we've got huge AoE crowd control, self-cleanse, shield restore, armor and shield strip on demand, and on top of all that, we've also got infinite scaling damage. Is this hacks? Is this a dream? Is this Sparta? No. This is Hardcore Endgame, Gara Edition. Okwat Tanzin Wan, my people, and welcome to the Hardcore Endgame build guide for Gara. This video is going to be packed with information, so I want to jump right into it. I will give you a second to click the like button though, because that helps the channel more than you can imagine. Go ahead, click it. Alright, now let's talk about build requirements. For Gara, you'll need an Arcane Reactor, an Aura Forma, and 2 regular Forma. You can get away with the normal Forma in the Aura slot, but then you're locked into a single polarity, and that's not recommended. This setup also requires a stat stick, which is a melee weapon we use just for the mod slots. If you decide to use a melee weapon you've already pimped out, you won't need anything else. But if you want to turn something into a dedicated stat stick, you'll need an Arcane Catalyst and probably 4 to 6 additional Forma. My setup also utilizes Hildren's Pillage ability, so you'll need to have that in your Helminth library. Looking over the build, you'll see that we invest heavily in strength, but we're careful to not let any of the other ability attributes drop below 100%. Power strength gives us damage reduction and allows stacking large amounts of damage, but range, duration, and efficiency are all important for making this build work effectively. If you're not familiar with Gara, let me run through her abilities quickly. Her 1 Shattered Lash is a melee-style attack. A Quick Press does a pointed puncture-based attack, while a Held Press creates a wide, sweeping slash-based AoE swipe. Splinter Storm is her 2, and this is where we get our damage reduction as well as our stacking damage. It can be used on enemies to make them take increased damage, or on allies to share its damage reduction buff. But for this setup, we're just going to be talking about using it on ourselves. When we do this, it creates a cloud of glass shards that provide 90% damage reduction, and damage anything that gets within a few meters. Her default 3 is called Spectra Rage, and it has some niche case uses, but it's not required for this build. Instead, we've used Helminth to slot Pillage here. Casting Pillage sends out a wave that strips enemy armor and or shields. When the wave returns, it refills Gara's shields and can grant overshields. It also removes any negative status effects. With our power strength at nearly 300, a single instance of Pillage reduces enemy armor by 74%, and a second reduces it by more than 93% total. There are other decent Helminth options available, but I believe Pillage is far and away the superior choice. Finally, we have Gara's 4, Mass Vitrify. Casting it creates a circular wall of glass that expands outward from Gara until it's cancelled. This is where our CC comes from, as enemies that pass through the wall, or the wall passes through as it's expanding, are turned to glass and effectively stunned. It's also worth noting that Gara is invulnerable during the expansion phase. Clever players can use this to escape from all manner of precarious predicaments, questionable conundrums, and otherwise slippery pickles. Now, using Gara's abilities in a specific manner creates an extremely powerful interaction. The ability rotation is fairly simple. First, you cast Splinter Storm on yourself, and the easiest way to ensure you don't accidentally put it on an ally or enemy is to look straight up when casting it. You'll know it's on Gara when you see an icon on the bottom right showing a number. This number is the amount of damage per second your Splinter Storm will inflict to anything in its range. Next, you want to cast your 4 and cancel it fairly quickly. Allowing it to expand costs energy, so unless you need the CC or invulnerability, you can stop channeling almost immediately. Now you want to walk outside of the wall, then hit it with Shattered Lash. This destroys the wall, sending glass shards flying outward from the center. Enemies near the wall take damage from this, but Gara absorbs half of this damage amount into her Splinter Storm. If done correctly, you'll see the damage indicator in the bottom right jump up. You can repeat the cycle of creating a wall with 4, then destroying it from the outside with 1, repeatedly, each time stacking more damage on top of the previous amount. There's effectively no limit to how high you can stack this, and just 5 minutes of regular play with this build can give you a stack in the millions, enough to kill an Acolyte on Steel Path in a few ticks. There are 2 important things to watch out for though. First, you have to cast Mass Vitrify before the timer on Splinter Storm reaches 0 in order to refresh its duration. If the timer reaches 0, you'll lose the buff and all stacks you had acquired. Keep in mind that Mass Vitrify has a wind-up, so try to start the animation at least a few seconds early. The other danger is Nullifier bubbles. as contacting them will immediately cancel Splinter Storm and wipe out all of your stacks. It's good to have a high rate of fire primary or secondary on hand to deal with nullifier bubbles from a distance. At this point I want to jump into the builds for Gara and the stat stick, but I think that in order to explain why I'm using certain mods, it's important to understand how the game calculates Gara's stacking damage. If you don't care about the math behind the scenes, or you feel like I'm geeking out too hard, feel free to skip ahead to the next part where I go through the build in detail. What you're seeing now is the formula used to calculate how much damage is added when you stack Splinter Storm. The two abilities that are being used are Shattered Lash on the left and Mass Vitrify on the right. The formula calculates the multipliers associated with each of those abilities, adds them together to get the wall's total splash damage when destroyed, then cuts it in half to get the amount added to Gara's Splinter Storm. The Mass Vitrify side simply multiplies its base damage, which is 800, by our total power strength. The Shattered Lash side, however, is where a stat stick comes into play, so we end up with 4 multipliers. 2 of these are the same as what we saw on the other side. Shattered Lash's base damage, which is also 800, and our total power strength. We also have the total of all flat melee damage bonuses, such as Steel Charge Aura and Arcane Fury, but also mods on the stat stick like Primed Pressure Point and Spoiled Strike. And fourth is the total of all elemental damage bonuses, such as Primed Fever Strike and North Wind mods, as well as physical damage bonuses from Impact, Puncture, and Slash, or IPS mods, such as Augur Strike or Buzzkill. It's worth noting that Shattered Lash has no way of dealing impact damage, so there's no benefit to impact mods on Gara's stat stick. Furthermore, since you can only deal one of Slash or Puncture damage depending on how you cast the ability, there's no benefit to adding mods for more than one of them. Now that I've gone through all of that, let me explain why it's important to understand the math. When you're dealing with several multipliers in a formula, you want to maintain as much of a balance as possible. If you have the option of adding another 100% to a multiplier that's already loaded up, or adding that 100% to a different multiplier that's almost empty, you'll get more value from going with the latter option. It's what's commonly referred to as diminishing returns. And what you're seeing now is a tool I built for easy testing of different options that affect how much damage is added to Splinter Storm each time a stack is added. I've got the 4 multipliers represented here, with the options I was most interested in testing. I also have 2 instances of the same tool top and bottom, so that I can compare 2 different builds at the same time. Since we have no control over the base damage of abilities, there's no reason to talk about that multiplier. Ability strength is something we do have control over, but mostly with Warframe mods where there's no melee damage related alternative to power strength. The Aura slot is an exception to this, as you can choose between Steel Charge or Growing Power, and I'll show you how that matters in just a minute. But as far as power strength goes, I found it best to see what made sense for the builds separately, rather than trying to balance this multiplier with the others. Because of that, I've already filled the tool with what my build uses on our Warframe. The real either-or choices are on the stat stick, so that's where we want to be careful to not invest in diminishing returns. You can see right away that we're already getting 240% base melee damage from the Gara build, 60% from Steel Charge, and 180% from Arcane Fury. So just to illustrate the point about diminishing returns, let's look at the difference between adding more base damage versus adding elemental damage at this point. I'll choose 100% base damage top with Blade of Truth and 100% toxin damage bottom with Toxic Blight. A difference of nearly 3,000 damage. So you see what I'm talking about. But I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself, so let's remove those for now. First thing we should do is add the big numbers that are too important to leave out. Primed Pressure Point for base damage, Primed Fever Strike, and Augur Strike for elemental damage. I'm using Augur Strike because it's puncture damage, and I prefer the quick cast of Gara's 1 when breaking walls, which is puncture damage. If you'd rather use a held cast of Shattered Lash to break walls for some reason, you would use Buzzkill here instead for the same 120% bonus, but to slash damage instead of puncture. You can see we're lopsided in favor of base damage, but we still have 5 mod slots open and only 2 good options left for that side. So let's add North Wind to get closer to balance and also give our weapon viral damage just in case we ever need to use it as more than a stat stick. Add Molten Impact for the same reason, and Spoiled Strike since it's the highest universal mod bonus left and the only one that will add base damage. This is a good place to pause and consider what's next, as there are just 2 mod slots remaining. There are really 4 possible scenarios here. First scenario, you already have a Riven mod for a melee weapon with a good disposition, I'd say 1.2 or higher, that isn't Jawsword, Mire, Skana, or Dual Cleavers. In that case, the Riven will take up one of the remaining slots, and the final slot should go to Sundering Strike, since it's the best option left at 90%. If you don't have Sundering Strike, you can add Shocking Touch, but this will turn your heat damage into radiation, should you ever use the weapon directly. Second scenario, you already have a Riven for one of the aforementioned weapons, or you plan on getting one, in which case that will take up a slot, and the last should go to the associated Syndicate mod, which will add 100% base damage. Third scenario, you do not have a Riven mod for a melee weapon with a good disposition, and you don't care to get one. Now it gets interesting. Since you'll have to add Sundering Strike either way, let's plug that into both top and bottom. Now all of a sudden we have a larger bonus from elemental damage than from base damage. Now if we choose Jawsword with its base damage mod top, and Mire with its elemental mod bottom, you can see how those diminishing returns have an effect. But because we didn't get too unbalanced, the difference is negligible. So if you're in this position, you can choose either Jawsword, Skainai, or Dual Cleavers, and use its associated Syndicate mod for 100% base damage, for slightly higher damage per stack. Or you can go with Mire and its associated Toxic Blight mod to get the better Syndicate proc, which refills 25% of your energy pool, gives 1,000 viral damage with a guaranteed proc to enemies within 25 meters, and 10% bonus movement speed for 30 seconds. The fourth and final scenario, you don't have a Riven for a weapon with a good disposition, but you do plan on getting one, or you still need to roll one to get good stats, whatever. People in this position will want to add Sundering Strike, and then look for a Riven or roll that has either melee damage, or both melee damage and elemental or puncture damage. Be careful not to get plus impact damage, since that will have no effect. But, for the same reason, negative impact damage makes a wonderful curse for a Riven you'll be using exclusively for Gara. As for me, I already had a Riven for Mire, and for now it's got electricity and heat. I'm unbalanced for elemental damage, which isn't optimal, but for now it works just fine. Last thing we need to look at is the Gara build, which seems weird since this is a Gara build video, but whatever. Hey, respect to anyone who stuck with me and didn't skip ahead. And don't tell the others about the secret code for free platinum I gave you earlier, okay? Okay, we've got Steel Charge in the aura slot for raw melee damage. Remember earlier when I said we could put Growing Power in here to get more ability strength and create more balance in our multipliers? Yeah, we don't want to do that. And the main reason why is that Steel Charge adds 60% to melee damage, while Growing Power adds 25% to ability strength. And the gap between those two multipliers isn't large enough to where the 25% is more valuable. There's also the fact that you need to cast Shattered Lash within 6 seconds of getting an energy orb, so it ends up being kind of a random buff when you're in the heat of battle. Arcane Fury is our other melee damage buff, and at max rank it has a very good chance to proc when we damage an enemy with a crit, and lasts for 18 seconds. The best way to keep that buff up is to carry a primary or secondary modded for high crit chance, and shoot enemies every few seconds. I like Fulmin here, since it can reach 70% crit chance with Point Strike, or even 80.4% with critical delay. The negative fire rate from the latter can be offset and then some with Shred, Speed Trigger, Vile Acceleration, Vigilante Fervor, or Spring-Loaded Chamber. And since we only care about getting crits, not killing anything with it, we can slap on some multi-shot and reload speed too. Fulmin also has the added benefit of not requiring ammo and automatically reloading. And it has a relatively high base rate of fire to start with, making it great for popping nullifier bubbles like I mentioned a few hours ago. Remember? Yeah, you remember. By the way, if you're wondering why I use Arcane Fury over Arcane Blade Charger, it's because even though Blade Charger gives a larger bonus at 300%, it only procs on kills with our primary weapon, and has half the proc chance at 30%, and only lasts for 12 seconds instead of 18. While that's something we can pull off regularly at the start of Steel Path missions, it's not as reliable later on. But if you feel more comfortable with it for some reason, do whatever crumples your bumper. The other arcane slot goes to Energized. We don't have mod space to increase our energy pool, so we need to make the most of orbs when they drop. We get all the ability strength we need from Umbral Intensify, Transient Fortitude, and Blind Rage. We offset the negative efficiency from Blind Rage with Fleeting Expertise. We offset the negative duration from Transient Fortitude and Fleeting Expertise with Narrow-Minded and Prime Continuity. And finally, we offset the negative range from Narrow-Minded with Stretch, Augur Reach, and Cunning Drift. You could put Power Drift in the Exilus slot to eke out a bit more strength, but that drops the range of Splinter Storm below 3 meters, which feels kinda clunky to me. And strength is already extremely high. I think the 15% from the Exilus slot is much more valuable as range. And that's the entire setup. You're done. Congrats on making it through the whole video. I'll be honest, not many people make it all the way, so it gets kinda lonely here at the end. I just want you to know I appreciate you sticking with me through, all the hard times. The The psychotic episodes, the binge drinking, and the math. Yeah, mostly the math. Hey, you go out there and make it a great day, okay, buddy?